Having nice furniture alone doesn't solve the core problem of making a room work. Because when the layout is wrong, the room won't feel good no matter how stylish the pieces are. That's why in this video, I'm going to show you the exact 8-step method I use in my daily life as an architect to evaluate and then generate furniture layout plans. We're going to cover movement paths, zones, symmetry, sightlines and more. And I'm going to show all this information using floor plans and pictures so you can see exactly what I mean, and hopefully you can use the same logic and apply it to your space. And everything that I cover doesn't require you to change walls or doors or windows, etc. So it's even renter friendly. So the first thing I do when I have an empty floor plan is to map out the circulation routes that people naturally take through a room. Have you ever heard of desire paths? It's like when you go to a park, you can see where the landscape designer has purposely built these pathways that people are supposed to take. But sometimes you also see trails in the grass that have been made and worn down by so many people's footsteps. They're not supposed to be there, but people made them there because these trails show the route that people actually want to take. And in the home, this is the same thing. People will naturally want to move a certain way. And yes, you can ignore it, but people are always going to feel like they're fighting against something rather than going with the flow of the room. For example, in this room, we have a circulation route that's clearly here. If you put a sofa in the way, suddenly people are squeezing past, they're bumping their knees. And when you're sitting in the sofa, it's not going to feel very comfortable. So this is why having a clear overview of how people are likely to move in the space is so important before you start putting in the furniture. Once you've mapped the pathways, what's left are the pockets of space where people don't naturally walk. And these are the safe zones in your living room for where you can put in furniture. We instinctively avoid sitting in high traffic areas. If given the choice, nobody would choose a restaurant table that's right next to the front door, the kitchen door, or the toilets. Because we all know that customers are going to be walking around, brushing past us. You're going to feel really restless and annoyed. And it's the same thing at home. The best places to sit are always out of the way of traffic. So if we look at this floor plan, once we trace the paths that people take, the biggest, most undisturbed pocket is perfect for seating. And the other large pocket works perfectly for the dining area. And the slimmer edge becomes a secondary zone for something less essential, like a desk, a piano, or, bookshelves. Once you've decided on the different pockets of space and what's going to go in them, the next question is, how do you actually place the furniture? There are so many ways of arranging your seating area, and not all of them are good. A simple rule is to look for order and symmetry. Humans like balance. Our brains find it easier to process spaces that just line up and have a little bit of order to them. If we compare asymmetric, chaotic designs versus more orderly designs across all these objects, the orderly one looks a bit better and, feels better to be around. Obviously, when things are too orderly and boring, it can be monotonous. It's like a sliding scale. And if something is too unorderly, it's chaotic and messy and our brain just cannot process it. But I think in general, if you're not sure, it's always better to start with some order, alignment, symmetry, and then play around with the balance of things and make it a little bit more interesting afterwards. So this is why when I'm doing the furniture layout, I always look for clear axes in the room, whether that's a fireplace, a central window, a ceiling fixture. So let's go back to this spacious, multi-purpose, open-plan living room. The fireplace and windows give us strong axes, so it makes sense to arrange the seating around them instead of, scattering things at random angles. And in the dining area, this window here and this wall are the anchor. So I would draw a line here and then put the table centered on it. If we were to push this table to one side, doesn't it feel like the table doesn't really belong here, or it's a bit awkward and hasn't really been thought about? I hope that you also see it and you agree with me that when something is centered and has something that's aligned, it just looks and feels better. When you walk into a room, the very first thing you see kind of sets the tone. And that's why shops, hotels, restaurants, they really carefully curate the entrance experience. A boutique hotel lobby leads with a styled desk or lounge. A restaurant frames tables and atmosphere, not the kitchen door. And the same thing applies at home. In this living room, the main sightline is from the entrance and staircase, because that's where people enter, pause, and take in the space. The family wanted the room to be comfortable for spending time together, with the TV as a secondary function, so it doesn't actually make sense for the TV to dominate the first view. But if we place the sofa here instead, and we put the TV in the corner, then the first view that you see when you enter the room is of a seating area. It's welcoming, there are objects for hobbies and activities, and immediately says, and this is where we relax and play as a family. Just think about how you want your living room to feel like, what message it's supposed to communicate to yourself and to, other people who use that space about how you want to live and what your lifestyle is. And then evaluate whether the first thing you see as you enter the room actually communicates this feeling. So the next step is to consider the sight lines from places where you actually be spending time in. So that's either from the sofa or the dining table or your favorite armchair. What is in front of you? Do you have access to a window? Or are you looking at dirty dishes or the door to the toilet? Psychology shows our mood is shaped by what we repeatedly look at. Research on biophilic design proves that views of nature, so trees, sky, water, reduces stress, lower blood pressure, and even speed up recovery in hospitals. And the opposite is also true. Here is an example. In this apartment, we have a window here, a living space here, and the kitchen here. So if we put the sofa like this, it's unlikely you'll look out of the window and look at the view. Instead, you're staring straight at the kitchen, which, depending on how tidy you are as a person, might be quite stressful because it's just, chaotic all the time. An alternative is to put the sofa against the wall. But how do you know which one is going to work better? So this is why considering sightlines from where you sit is an important step, because it gives us logic for making certain decisions. So if the sofa is on this wall, then most of the time when you're sitting down, you will be able to see the kitchen, the dining table, which is not great if that area is often messy. I know people are going to, at this point, probably say, well, just, keep your kitchen clean and spotless at all times. Don't live like a slob, which I say, yes, obviously that's great advice, but we also have to be a little bit realistic here. If, for example, you host a dinner party, you invite friends over on Friday evening, there's probably still going to be a little bit of a mess that's left over by Saturday morning. When you're having a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper, do you really have to look at the mess? Or wouldn't it be, nice just to be able to sit down and relax in that particular moment in time, not think about and not be distracted by other stuff that's going on in your home and just enjoy yourself? So my advice is always trying to just be as practical as you can and make life not so difficult and force yourself to be perfect all the time, because that is exhausting. So if you place the sofa on the other side of the wall, I think the view from the sofa is just so much calmer. What you see are the walls, which is less likely to get cluttered over time. If you just decorate it with some nice pictures and art pieces, it can become very peaceful daily backdrop that does not really accumulate mess so much. And if we go back a step now and consider the sightline from the entrance, I think it's also much nicer to be able to see the sofa instead of like the TV, because it just looks a little bit more welcoming and cozy. Once we've mapped out the layout, the next step is to decide what type of seating actually goes into it. I think for the seating area of a living space, you should always be able to form a seating circle, and that the seats should be quite versatile. With a seating circle, I don't mean literally a circle, but it just means arranging seats so you can face each other within conversational distance. When the seating area in your living room only has one linear sofa which faces in one direction, it then feels way too rigid and it's not like a very sociable kind of setup to have. Whereas if you give people the option to sit at slight angles to each other, to sit side by side, or to face each other, then it's much likely to be a little bit more relaxed, conversational, social type of seating arrangement. Now, if we go back to this living room, one could argue that there's not really enough space to put an armchair, but it's also okay because when you have people over, they can grab the dining chairs from nearby and just rotate them. And this is how it would turn into a seating circle. If possible, I would fill the living space with different types of chairs. One type of chair can't work for everyone or for every mood. People vary in size, posture, and habits. Some want support, some want to sink in, some perch, others sprawl. When every seat in the room is the same, someone is always uncomfortable. But having a variety of chairs adds movement, choices, and body shapes. Then we get to choose how to sit, where to sit, based on how we feel. Seats shouldn't just float around. Every seating zone needs a center to gather around, which is usually a coffee table, and if there's space, some side tables. Humans are wired to gather around shared focal points. Think of a campfire. People naturally sit in a circle around it, and the same pattern appears across cultures. The hearth in European homes or the Japanese fire pit. And I think having a coffee table in the middle of the room is like the modern fire pit. And if you have the space for it, I would also put in little side tables next to armchairs, next to sofas, not just because they look nice, but because they make you feel better too. I've talked about this in my previous videos, which is to feel really comfortable when you're sitting down. You should always have like a sense of enclosure around you. It doesn't literally mean you have to like create some sort of tent around yourself, right? It just means that you need to feel like somehow you're in a cozy, defined space. So if you have an armchair that's kind of in the corner, it can feel a bit lonely and uncomfortable. But if you create some sort of visual boundary around it, with a little side table and a lamp, then you have this visual enclosure and you just feel a little bit more cocooned and safe when you're sitting there. The next step is to define boundaries. To make the entire seating area feel complete and cozy, I do think it needs a clear boundary, and the simplest way to do this is with a rug. Just as walls or ceilings define a room, a rug defines a smaller zone within the room. As soon as you put a rug in, it anchors the furniture, ties the pieces together. I mean, don't you find that the rooms without a rug looks like a museum display? It also makes everything look so much more neat. Imagine you have a surface and you just have like a couple of little objects around. It can look quite messy and scattered because your eyes read the outline of every single object, and there's just like a lot to process. But if you were to group all these small objects onto a larger surface, it immediately looks much cleaner. Now they read as like one large entity. It's a lot easier to process and it looks like a bigger object and it just looks neater. And rugs basically do the same thing. If you're wondering how I created the floor plans that you see in this video, I have been using a software called Rayon Design, who also happens to be the sponsor of today's video. Since the beginning of this year, Rayon has replaced all the other 2D softwares I used to use for drafting floor plans, whether in my private work or for YouTube, because it's a fraction of the price of other softwares and is really fast and simple to use. In Rayon Design, you have an in-app library with thousands and thousands of elevation and top view furniture people blocks, so you can drag and drop them onto your drawings, which honestly, it does save me so much time. It also has a super sleek, clutter-free interface. You don't need a very powerful computer to use it, and it doesn't have a very long installation time. And if you don't want to install it, that's also fine, because you can just use it directly from your browser. It has the same features and capabilities. It also means you can basically log in from anywhere around the world on any computer and access the same files. You can create drawings in a whole range of details, from feasibility studies, schematic design, or detailed millwork. And if you're working on the same project with a friend or colleague, you can also invite them to work on the same canvas. So yeah, if you're someone who needs to create a floor plan, whether you're a student, a designer, or just someone who wants to play around with the layout of your space, give Rayon Design a try. It's free. Link in the description. So this is the 8-step system I use for arranging the furniture in a living room of all shapes and sizes. Obviously, the process doesn't stop here, because we can then go into things like lighting, storage, accessories, decor, but then it would make it like a lot longer, and I'm not sure if you guys want a 50-minute video. What matters now is that you have a clear framework to tackle your living room layout with much more clarity and confidence than 10 minutes ago before you started watching this video. I hope anyway. If you do want to know a little bit more about lighting and rug design, you should definitely watch the videos that are popping on the screen right now. And yeah, I hope you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!